Okay, so yesterday we talked about parallel lines. What do we know about parallel lines?
The
Slopes are the same. They have the same slopes, so slopes are the same. Today we're going to talk about perpendicular lines. What are perpendicular lines?
Lines that like cross and aren't.
So more specifically, any intersecting lines cross.
Yes.
But how are perpendicular lines special, Alex? They form 90-degree angles. So perpendicular lines are lines that intersect to form right angles. If you look at these two lines right here, these are perpendicular lines. So notice this line is falling, so what would the slope of this line have to be? This blue line, negative. This line is rising, the red line, so what would the slope of that one have to be? Positive. So I know that one has to be negative and one has to be positive. The other thing, they have to be opposites. One has to be positive, one has to be negative. The other thing is the slopes are reciprocal. So two non-vertical lines are perpendicular if the product of their slopes is -1. A vertical line and a horizontal line are also perpendicular. So what's the slope of a horizontal line?
0.
0. What's the slope of a perpendicular line?
Undefined.
Undefined. Can you have an opposite reciprocal of 0? No. 0 has no reciprocal. So horizontal and vertical lines are the exception to this part. This is why it says two non-vertical lines. Because for a vertical line, any horizontal line will be perpendicular to it. So if it is not a vertical line, then you have to find the opposite reciprocal of its slope. So notice here the red line, its slope is 1/2. The blue line, its slope is -2. So one of them's positive, one of them's negative, so that's the opposites. And then how do we find the reciprocal of a number? You flip it. So the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. So opposite and reciprocal. So opposite reciprocals are two numbers whose product is -1. What's the opposite reciprocal of 1? -1. So that's kind of an exception. Most of the time we think one has to be a fraction if the other one's a whole number. But in order to flip 1, it's just 1/1 again. So the opposite reciprocal of 1 is -1. Alright, so here, first thing we're going to do is classify lines. So I want to know if the graphs of 2y equals -3x plus 6 and y equals 2/3 x plus 2 are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So if they're parallel, what do the slopes have to be? The same. If they're perpendicular, what do the slopes have to be? Opposite reciprocals. And if it's anything else, so if they're just opposites, or if they're just reciprocals, or if they're way off, then it will be neither. They're just intersecting lines. So first thing, this equation, y equals 2/3 x plus 2, is in slope-intercept form, so I can see the slope. Is this one in either slope-intercept or point-slope form? No. So I need to solve for y on this one so that I can see what the slope is. How am I going to solve for y here?
Divide each side by 2.
Yep. So I'm going to divide everything by 2 here. So that cancels out and I have y. Remember, you need to distribute this division of 2 to both. So here I'd have -3 times x plus what?
3.
Plus 3. Because 6 divided by 2 is 3. So what's the slope of this equation? -3/2. What's the slope of this equation?
2/3.
So are my slopes equal?
No.
No. So are my lines parallel?
No.
No. Are my slopes opposite reciprocals?
Yes.
Yes. So therefore, what kind of lines do these equations represent?
Perpendicular.
Perpendicular. So one thing, parallel lines, it's like two L's next to each other. That's a symbol for parallel lines. Perpendicular line, it's an upside down T. So what you could say here, you can use the symbol. So it's perpendicular. Slopes are opposite reciprocals. So make sure you explain with words.
And then if it were to be parallel, you would just need to say the
Slopes are equal. Yep. And then say one of them was -3/2, the other one was -2/3. That would be neither because they're just reciprocals. They aren't opposite reciprocals. So one has to be positive, one has to be negative, and then they have to be flipped. One thing with solving for y, you could have, like they could have had an equation there that was 3x plus 2y equals 6. What would I have to get rid of first in order to get y alone? 3x. How would I get rid of 3x? Yep. I would subtract it from both sides. Remember, we're trying to get it into slope-intercept form. So what I would do, make that plus a negative. Write your x term first, so 3x plus 6. And then divide by 2 from there to get it so that y is alone. So some of them you're going to have to go through multiple steps in order to get y alone. It's revisiting section 2.5 where we were solving equations with two variables. I'll come back to that later if you don't have it done. Alright, so problem 3, what we're doing is writing an equation of a perpendicular line. So we're given a point, because we're going to graph the equation that passes through 10, 15. And then it's perpendicular to the graph of y equals -5, 6x minus 2. Once again, you're just looking at the slope of that equation, not anything else. So what is the slope of this equation? -5, 6. The slope of my line perpendicular has to be the opposite reciprocal of that. So what is the opposite reciprocal of -5, 6? 6/5. So if it starts out negative, then my new slope has to be positive, and then you just flip it around. If it starts out positive, then my new slope would have to be negative, and then find the reciprocal of it. So now point slope. So I do y minus 15 equals times. Very good. So what's my first step here? I'm going to distribute first. So y minus 15 equals, what is 10 times 6/5? 60 over 5, and 60 divided by 5 is? 12.